Ahoy, Captains! This is Uncle Neil coming at you today with Series of Legends. This is where I meet up with notable Subsim players, developers, and enthusiasts to discuss the games, mods, and submarine history. Joining me today is Nils Ducker, CEO of Triassic Games and co-developer of Cold Waters. This is going to be a two-part episode. First part will be today, and the second part will feature the other members of the development team, including Martin Liedel, who previously worked on a PC/mobile game called Silent Depth, along with Matt, one of the members of the .mod team who joined up with Triassic Games, and Przemek Starkiewicz, one of the members of Triassic Games who also served a significant role in the development of Cold Waters and Atlantic Fleet. So with me today I have Nils Ducker, one of the co-designers of Atlantic Fleet, Pacific Fleet, and everybody's favorite Cold Waters, and now the head of Triassic Studios, where he's working on a new game called Sea Power. Nils, how are you doing? It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thank you. It's been too long.
It's been a while. I remember before Cold Waters came out, once every few months I'd ask you for an update on what you were working on, and you would slip me some artwork, and I mean, it was easy to see that you guys were onto something then.
Yeah, it was some time ago.
Okay. Nils, you're one of my three favorite Swedes. Give me an overview of your gaming development background.
When I was a little kid, we had a Commodore 64, and my dad, he brought home games for it, and like one day he brought home a big blue cardboard box called Silent Service, and he played that game religiously. It was on tape, and well, after a while we began to play that together. So like I would handle the controls, and he would like sit back and give tactical orders. And then we got an Amiga, and eventually we got Red Storm Rising, and well, that was far too modern for him, so he wasn't really interested. But I liked it a lot, so I ended up playing Red Storm Rising quite a lot.
Yeah, I remember you've been telling me that's one of your favorite games to start with. Yeah.
So I had that, and then on the Commodore I had PHM Pegasus, which is an old Lucasfilm game where you control a Pegasus hydrofoil missile boat, and you you drive around in a first-person perspective, and you gun it out with Iranians and Cubans and communists and
everybody's favorite bad guy.
Yeah, you mean like the 80s.
Yep.
Standard bad guys, and that was a lot of fun. And well, I always liked to do graphics on the computer. So I had drawing programs on the Commodore and the Amiga. So I used to draw a lot, and on the Commodore I had this tool called Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit.
Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit.
Yeah, and what that was like a tool set where you could like draw your own sprites, and you could make simple animations, and you could do your own level graphics sets, and you can design levels, and you could place enemies, and it was it was kind of designed to make these simple, like vertically scrolling shooters like you would see in the arcades back in the 80s. But I always found new creative ways to do things it wasn't meant to. So I made naval games and stuff with that.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to make my own sim games, because I was a huge fan of Microprose games.
Yeah.
And basically anything that had filled polygons.
Yeah.
That was stuff I liked. Well, that's what eventually got me into the modding scene.
Right.
I started off doing like simple flight sims using a flight sim toolkit software for PC. This was back in the mid 90s. It had like it was kind of the same thing as the shooter construction thing on the Commodore, but this had like a primitive CAD 3D suite, so you could like build 3D objects, and you could build your own worlds, and you could make terrain, and you could like place objects and design cockpits, and well, I spent a lot of time building building things in that, including ships, of course, and well, eventually I started modding. I started modding a game called IndyCar Racing because I've always been like into Formula One and Indy cars.
Right.
So I started off building my own cars, doing livery sets for them, and then later on when I moved to live on my own, I had an old 200 megahertz PC, and that's where I started getting into modding. First Quake 2, and then Half-Life. And that's where I sort of got into 3D modeling as a real hobby because I started off doing weapons like most modders did back then, weapons and maps, and then I started doing characters, and then eventually I got back into flight sims with Strike Fighters. So I started building progressively more intricate planes for that sim, and eventually I got back into modeling ships again.
So at that point, would you say you were self-taught?
Yeah, pretty much. I worked as a machinist at the time, and
Machinist by
well,
day and game modeler by night.
yeah, pretty much. So eventually I tired of my day job and wanted something else. So I figured, why not try and actually get into game development as a trade? So I applied for a couple of like vocational schools, and well, I got inducted into one, and that was a game art program, and that was useful because like we learned a lot of like contemporary tech that was like state of the art at the time, and we also got to work in teams and build games from scratch in various genres. So it was like you would have 4 weeks or 8 weeks to build a game. I think it was 4 weeks to build like a simple turn-based strategy game, for instance, and then it was like 8 weeks to build a first-person shooter and 8 weeks to build an RTS.
8 weeks
And
doesn't sound like a lot of time.
no, but well, when everybody's burning the midnight oil,
You get a lot of work done when you're really
yeah,
moving.
you get things done, and actually you can get a lot of stuff done. So you can have I mean, they were very simple games, not a whole lot of content, but they were playable.
Yeah.
And we'll use a lot of that stuff for our portfolios. And well, after that, I did an internship at a small studio that made mobile games. So
Okay.
my first ever published game is actually a 3D golf game for mobiles.
Okay.
Yeah, this was about well 2 years before I met Paul.
Right.
And
Paul being the other half of Killerfish Games.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And well, long story short, at that startup, the entire dev team were all interns, right? So we were
Right.
all interns from the same school, so we knew each other. And well, it just happened that I became the lead artist, and another guy became the lead programmer, and that worked. So I was voted lead artist on the follow-up project, and then after that project, essentially they didn't have the money to like keep all of us hired, so we started going our separate ways, and I eventually ended up at Dice,
Okay.
EA Dice, where to work on Battlefield 3.
Yep. I love Dice. I love their first few games, and they made a big impression on me. I really enjoyed the Battlefield 42 and the Battlefield Vietnam.
Mm.
That was an amazing game. I had a lot of fun with
Yeah,
that one.
yeah, it was pretty cool to actually like move to the big city and work at a AAA studio.
Yeah, seriously. At that point, you had to
Um,
be pretty happy about your progress.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's nice because the thing is when you work at the AAA companies, everybody there is always at the top of their game.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot of stuff. So eventually, what I ended up doing on Battlefield 3 was mainly optimizing art assets.
Okay. That's a good skill to have.
Yeah, because like they have all these super intricate models, right? But if you have a lot of super intricate models, eventually you're just pushing too much for the graphics hardware to keep up.
Yeah. Performance
So
takes a
because
hit.
yeah, so you have to have like optimized versions that you switch between in the game to keep the amount of draw calls down. Yeah.
So these reducing draw calls, was that something you were familiar with, or did you learn some of that on the job?
No, I learned that on the job actually.
Yeah. And
And
how about optimizing it in a way where if something is not actually part of the focus or the view of the character, you can
hmm,
reduce it that way.
yeah, exactly. So most common way is if you have like let's say I have a very detailed destroyer model or a U-boat model. So when the camera, as we move the camera away from it, at some arbitrary point,
Right.
we just switch to another model that is maybe a tenth of a polygon count.
Right. Because it doesn't matter. You can't see it anyway from that range.
No, 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 exactly. But it's much faster to render, and of course, um, you have all these invisible things that you don't see, but are there necessary for the game, like physics colliders, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
um, which can be very expensive. So that's actually something we do now in C Power to keep performance up. Is that we build these like special ray casting meshes that we use to determine hit decal placement.
Now,
Because you can't use like the actual render mesh for that because it would be far too expensive.
all right. Now, somewhere in this part in your life, you were in the Swedish Navy, right?
No, that was much earlier.
That was before the development phase,
Yeah.
before you
So that
became a
was
machinist.
so that's what when I was about I was 20 when I was in the Navy.
Okay, what did you do in
Uh,
the Navy?
I was kind of a combat systems operator. So what I essentially did was manning the plot, the tactical plot.
So you get input from the sensor operators, the radar.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, can't go into details, of course, but well, we had various shoreside sensors, and we had other assets that would identify maritime traffic for us.
Right. So at the point where you were starting to get your feet wet in developing in 3D modeling, you and Dr. Paul
Yeah.
Sincock, you guys met up. How did you guys land each other?
Well, if you recall, he originally published a version of Pacific Fleet, and I think he posted it on Subsim actually. So he had a trailer, and uh, well, I thought it was cool because at the time, like when I was at that mobile game startup, I was pitching some simple naval games that we could be doing, but of course, none of the other other people there, especially not management, were interested in that, and they
They
were
weren't
like,
they weren't true believers.
no, at the time I used to play Fast Attack on the lunch breaks, and they would like they would like come by my workstation and see me doing the TMA and stuff, and they would just like snicker behind my back.
Oh no.
So anyway, I think I told them something like, "It's a cool game you have there, but I think I can build you some nicer ships if you want." And he liked that idea, so I started building ship models for it.
Okay. And that was for Pacific Fleet, the newer
Yeah,
version.
yeah, and at the time I was working at Tarsier Games on well, it was on like the Little Big Planet 2. We were
Right.
doing DLC packs for that. So at this point, that was kind of my day job. So I would work like 8 to 10 hours on that, and then I would try and work another 8 hours on Pacific Fleet with Paul, which was by now like a real project. Like it actually had turned into a quite substantial redesign of the original game. So we added a lot of things like you could ships could now navigate freely around the map, whereas in the first version it was just kind of like a they were fixed in relation to another, and you could like move your ship closer or farther away, and you had time of shots. But now you could use actual tactics like crossing the T and the and stuff.
But still, yeah, it made it where maneuvering was a big factor.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We actually had one user tell us that he was actually using the game to teach basic maneuvering to like
Nice.
his NROTC class or whatever it's called. So that was kind of cool. And Pacific Fleet was it did so well when we released it that well we could quit our day jobs. So at that point I'd already pitched like a nuclear submarine game to Paul, but we eventually settled on. We figured that was a bit too risky, so we settled on doing the
Atlantic Fleet.
What became Atlantic Fleet. Yeah,
Right. Get those U-boats in there at last.
yep. Atlantic Fleet was a really fun project. It well, I think that both of us were kind of at maybe at our creative peaks at that point. It was just a nice project to work on, and well, it did really well, of course. And after that,
After that, he
well,
was listening to your pitch about cold waters.
yeah, well, I had already like built some content for it and done concepts, and yeah, we started developing it. And initially, it was for the mobiles, but then we ported Atlantic Fleet to PC, to
Yeah.
Steam, and it was just an overall pleasant experience. And we found it so pleasant that we decided that Cold Waters would be a PC game instead. So we didn't have to deal with like, well, Apple in particular.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that was a good move too. I mean, mobile games, you can only do so much with a mobile game.
I think that we were really lucky to be out there at the point in time where we did, because when uh, when we released Pacific Fleet, there wasn't really a whole lot of like good 3D games for mobiles. At least not in that genre, that took the subject matter somewhat seriously. And of course, we capitalized on that existing fan base when we did Atlantic Fleet,
Sure.
and then we capitalized on that fan base when we later greenlit Cold Waters. And I remember we greenlit Cold Water. We launched the greenlight campaign for Cold Waters, and I think it got greenlit within 4 days or something.
Doesn't surprise me. There's
Yeah.
such a drought for the modern naval game. It's either the Silent Hunter series or the Sonalysts series, and the
Mm.
Sonalysts made their last game back in 2005 or whatever.
Yeah, and I was always kind of well, I guess I don't enjoy the Sonalyst games maybe as much as I should. I always felt that Fast Attack was a much more entertaining sim than Dangerous Waters or Sub Command.
Right. Well, Fast Attack was a really good sim. I mean,
Mm.
before its time, It was
Mm.
pretty solid. The gameplay was really solid. The
Well,
graphics were kind of rough, but for that time they were probably considered okay.
well, what I like about it is that like the panels are very authentic. The various stations in Fast Attack, they're all very authentic. They're much more authentic than what was in the Sonalysts games.
Wonder if that could be a byproduct of Sonalysts also being a Navy contractor, to where they have to manage how much they give away and how much they fabricate.
I don't know. I think all of the dev team for Fast Attack were ex-Navy guys.
Oh yeah, I interviewed one for one of my submarine almanac books a few years back, and
Yeah, Jim France.
I really liked listening to his stories and how they put that game together.
Yeah,
Well, in Cold Waters, when you
yeah.
first started releasing information about Cold Waters, were you nervous that you would get beat up by the rivet counters saying this is not realistic enough, or
Yeah, of course.
but it turned out when it came out, you won over pretty much everybody. Rivet counters, casual players, people like me who had some preconceived notions about what they would enjoy in a naval game, the interface. You weren't sitting there watching screens all the, you were
The
watching your
action.
action. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely your
yeah.
own sub, and it was very entertaining, but it was realistic enough to be enjoyable too.
The thing I always liked about Redstone Rising, well, in Redstone Rising you are watching a display, true, but you're also watching the action unfold on the display. I mean, you're seeing quite a lot more on the Redstone Rising tactical display than you actually would on a submarine.
Sure,
Because you can see like incoming torpedoes and stuff in real time, and you can evade them, and well, all that stuff is a lot of fun, right?
sure, it
And
is. It's very
yeah,
cinematic. If you're
yeah.
watching a
So
movie, if you're watching a movie about submarines, like Hunt for Red October, you don't want to just stare at the sonar panel all the time. You want to be entertained. So having a
yeah,
blend of both is, if you can balance it right, and I think Cold Waters did that. I think you could be very successful.
yeah. So one idea that I had, and this was already back when I was at that game development school. It would be cool to have a nuclear submarine game, but instead of sitting inside it, you would like see it from more of an RTS perspective, right?
Yeah.
I did sketches and stuff and kept working on that concept and can actually show you. I had it as a little hobby project when I was at DICE as well.
Okay.
And this is from 2012. Yeah, it kind of looks familiar, doesn't it?
Doesn't it though?
Yeah. So, well, there's an old Tom Clancy game. Before he did Rainbow Six, they did another game called Tom Clancy SSN.
I do remember it. I wasn't very taken by that game, and I remember
Mm.
you and I had discussions. Now that looking back at it, you were kind of feeling me out to see what my take was on it.
Yeah,
And I told you I didn't enjoy it. But
yeah,
the big difference was you respected the realism enough to where it wasn't a magic window you were looking at. You were just looking at the
mm.
results of what was happening. You couldn't influence the results through the window as much as Tom Clancy's SSN.
Yeah. I actually enjoyed the SSN game a lot. So I understand what they were trying to do. So what they were trying to do was treat the 3D window as kind of a plot. So things appear and disappear based on you detecting them or not. It's actually kind of a cool concept, but sure, I mean there are things in that game that definitely could be improved. Like they had surface ships that are essentially just floating targets and
Right.
didn't really fight back. Helicopters didn't do anything.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can't remember playing that game for more than a couple hours, and
yeah,
I was
actually,
done with it.
the submarine fights were pretty tense and entertaining. You could do cool things in it, like you could stalk the Chinese Han submarines without them noticing you, and you could like stay on their tail, and they would like clear their baffles, and they would go up to periscope depth, and then they would dive down beneath a layer, and they would clear the battles again, and they would do stuff. So that was actually kind of compelling. Well, I had this pitch, but I also had another pitch that was more of like fast attack, but well, running on a tablet perspective. Subsim because, well, we had done we had done these external perspective naval games, and they
Right,
did pretty well.
right.
And we were quite convinced that we could do something something cool. Well, I think we succeeded.
Well, I can't argue
Sure,
with
I
that.
mean, sure, I mean, Cold Waters has its flaws, and yeah, maybe some of the design choices we made kind of backfired on us, like forcing a player to
Use the
do manual.
WASD keys.
Yeah, do a manual helm control. Yeah, but
Yeah, I
most
remember
players are
there were
accustomed
a
to.
few comments and UI requests from the community, and you guys made some of those, put those in the game.
Yeah,
That wasn't something you were stuck with. You were able to make those changes and satisfy
yeah.
people's desires.
I remember we had one guy who absolutely hated the game to the extent that I had to actually ban him off of the Steam forums.
He just couldn't let it go.
Nope, our game's existence was like a red blanket to him.
I was very happy with the upgrades too. I liked them. I liked the continuing work you guys did on it. Played all the way through the campaign, both campaigns. It was a lot of fun. And then I think about a year and a half after I picked it up and I played through the campaign again. You know, it was just a lot of fun. Each mission built on the next one.
Yeah, I mean, people are still playing it and developing mods for
Yeah,
it
they are.
and streaming it. So we must have done something right.
I think you did. I think you did. Pretty much, it was the kind of game that could both casual players and people that consider themselves realistic players. I think they could both
Hmm.
enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, well, it sits there in like a happy middle ground between like action and simulation.
Yeah, I understand. And then, of course, the models, all the ships, they were designed, they were built by you, right?
Yeah, with a few built by Premic.
I mean, the fidelity of the models, the details, that was just very pleasurable seeing the submarines, watching them.
It's actually kind of funny because the Cold Waters models, they were of course ripped, so they keep showing up on like these 3D market sites.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, yeah. So like every 6 months, I have to take a couple of hours off just to send out a bunch of
Cease and
DMCA
desist.
requests. Yeah,
Yeah,
but well, I guess it's a kind of a badge of honor. But people think they're good enough to
try to steal and make money
steal.
off of them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Now, after Cold Waters came out and it was successful, you guys did some updates to it. Were there any discussions with you and Paul about adding an expansion or building onto that world? Because that's one of the things I've always wondered. A game comes out, the development team will add like an expansion. Silent Hunter,
Mm.
the original one, they obviously had somebody still adding content to it. You could buy these patrol discs for $10, and it would add, nothing super significant, but it gave you something to build the game with. I think Aces of the Deep did the same thing. They came out with a version of it called Command Aces.
Yeah, well, we came out with that South China Sea expansion.
That's right.
Yeah,
Did you guys think about doing any more to that? I mean, was there room to build on it?
there were definitely ideas, but I think relatively quickly we started working on concepts for a follow-up game
A different
because
game.
a follow-up game. So different. Well, we had some creative issues. He went one way and I went the other.
You split the band. Cold Waters, the IP, does it still reside with Paul?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Okay, so then if there are going to be any additions to Cold Waters, it'll be from Paul. He's got another game they released a while back called War on the Sea.
Yeah, which is like his pet project. He was always a huge fan of Great Naval Battles.
Yeah,
Great Naval Battles 2.
so this is his spiritual
Uh,
successor to that.
it's a pretty cool game. Yeah, he's probably very happy with it.
So after this, then you started your own studio, Triassic Studios, and you partnered up with Martin Liddell, who he made the excellent mobile game Silent Depth, which was a Pacific U.S. submarine game. Put it on PC, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, maybe we can add maybe we can add him here.